All right, welcome to another episode of Peanuts from the Plebs. Here we are. I'm losing count of how many we've already done. This is amazing. All right,
well since I'm doing the editing, I haven't lost count. We're on episode.
Okay, whatever.
She can tell you to the minute.
All right. Anybody want to start? What happened this week? I know that World War II was in the air, and because of the 75th anniversary, and we had some primaries on Tuesday. So anybody?
Crazy stuff.
I mean, go ahead.
We have specifically kind of like protest related stuff still going on, right? So the whole thing with Chaz is now chopped, and they've had a few shootings there, and the mayor's talking about dismantling it, and also they've got a lawsuit against the city. So there's that interesting stuff. There's the Bubba Wallace NASCAR noose interesting story.
Right.
Yeah, what do we have for good news for the protests going on, except for the fact that everyone is still awake. Everyone is still 100% aware that, George Floyd was murder.
Right.
And I think it's just the level of awareness of the militarization of the police and everything is still very heightened.
I don't think the protests are going to die down, especially because I think things are going to get worse economically, unfortunately, over the next few months. So you're going to see probably a continuation of unrest. What I'm noticing, though, is kind of the reaction is getting organized now. So you have, of course, Trump calling for sending the military into cities to put down to dominate these protests or whatever, but you also have people.
But he hasn't, and I wonder if that's like a political move to make people on his side say, "See, this is what the Democrats do,"
Right. Well, I mean, what I'm finding also interesting is that people in the so-called left, kind of center left, are saying they're starting to second guess now the motive for the protests and saying, well, when it goes down to tearing down, when it comes to tearing down statues of Ulysses Grant or whatever, or this is going too far, or we're seeing, it just seems like they're looking for reasons now to say, okay, it's going too far. It's a threat. It's a potential threat to the republic. It could evolve into anarchy. You had this reaction from the right, from Trump, authoritarian response to the protests. But I'm also seeing recently reaction kind of in the I call it the center left, I guess. I've seen Kim Iverson talking about, are they going after, baby Jesus now? They're basically, it's against, it's not just against the Confederate War monuments, but anybody who represents it's against America essentially. And also this guy, Brett Weinstein, who's one of the founders of the intellectual dark web, the IDW. He was recently on Joe Rogan, and I heard part of that, and he's very concerned about the anarchy that can result from these protests, because they don't have a clear idea of what they're fighting for, and that this is a threat to the republic. So again, it's an attack on America, either consciously or whatever. But I think it's interesting how we're getting that reaction from the so-called left, and I think there's a lot more legitimacy to these protests than they're actually giving them credit for.
Well, if the anarchy takes the form of Democratic establishment candidates like Engel getting beat by Bowman, then I'm kind of all for it.
Exactly. I mean, and that must be like, I mean, that's the next topic, but obviously they see that's the way things are going, especially if
I mean, Engel was endorsed by everybody in the Democratic establishment. Even Hillary came out of the closet for that one.
That was a kiss of death, right?
That could be that effect. Yeah, she's not even current establishment. She's establishment like far back as like Biden or somebody, really.
Right, and he got Charles Booker in Kentucky. Looks like he's gonna pull out a victory over McGrath. I mean, we won't know until early next week, but it looks that way because they're waiting for the count from Lexington and Louisville, which will probably go heavily for Booker.
Yeah.
But
And
anyways,
AOC won too, which I actually consider to be like a win for the establishment, but most people don't think of her that way. So still, it shows how they're thinking when they're voting. They think they're voting for Medicare for all and, and free state college and all that, even though she's really working with Pelosi and whatever.
Well, the fact is they did have a candidate running against AOC who was basically, if you didn't know anything about, I mean, they looked, she had a Hispanic name as well, and not to say that had anything to do with it, but I mean, she was on the right, and she was a challenger. She only got whatever 18%, but there was an attempt made to at least. I don't know if they really thought she was ever going. This other candidate was going to win, but I mean, there was an attempt made to threaten AOC's seat. So no matter whether she's center or whatever, she's still seen as somebody less than.
Yeah, again, it happens despite the DNC's own rules about not primarying incumbents.
I think the rules are that any challenger from the left cannot run.
Those are the unwritten rules. That's right.
But can we get back to this this whole thing about the protests, which you raised, Jim, and what and I think there's a valid criticism from the established, I guess I call it the establishment for lack of a better term, that the protests in some respect they don't have a clear-cut program. They don't have clear-cut goals. And this was also a criticism of Occupy Wall Street, that they were against Wall Street. They were against the corruption. They were somehow against, crony capitalism, but it never really translated into a clear-cut policy, and it kind of just fizzled out. And you kind of had, the Tea Party, and you had these different things that they were maybe related to it, but it didn't result in a direct legislative program. And I think, maybe it is time to start talking about what would be a program, for the protests, other than just, police reform or defund the police. I mean, is there some kind of, could somehow the progressive program of single payer health care, of, end the wars, and somehow all these things somehow be tied into the protests and say, this is what we're calling for? What do you think?
Well, that would take some kind of centralized control over, or at least some, either existing or someone. It could be a Bowman, or it could be a Bowman. Actually, you've seen him speak. He's, really
right.
Somebody that's able to grab the reins, right, and steer it in a more productive direction, right. And right now, unfortunately, videotape of shootings in CHOP Seattle are not going to do us any good, right? And videotapes of people with like automatic weapons guarding the borders of CHOP are not going to do us any good. And we do need somebody to kind of to take the reins of the really valid anger and outrage that people have.
Right.
And try and steer it in a productive direction.
The first thing that I wanted to talk about was the statues coming down, right? So I can hear both sides of the argument. I do understand that obviously for some people it is offensive to see the glorification of certain figures in history because of their past, right? Because just like what Kim Iverson was saying, that we're all human and that we all have transgressions that we have committed, and so really we wouldn't be able to glorify anybody, essentially, right? Like that's one part of it. And the other part of it is that when you start there, where do you stop? That, and it seems like that's always the issue, right? In any sort of like what is considered social justice, sort of movement, you always have this whole sense of, okay, so but where do we end this? You know what I'm saying? Like, obviously you need to have clear defined goals, and once you achieve them, but being a progressive, quote unquote, you're never actually at your goal. The goalpost is always changing, right? And so I can see how for some people it is erasing their history. And like I said, it's this whole thing of where do you end? But you know, when I heard it being compared to, well, what about if that was like a statue of Hitler, you know, would we want to have statues? I mean, obviously we're not in Germany, but you know, if we were, you know, would that be okay? And obviously, how do you say yes, it'd be okay to have statues of Hitler?
What are the boundaries, right?
Right, exactly.
At the same time, you want to remember the horrors of history, right? So you want to have that,
which Kim did talk about in her thing.
Like you have Auschwitz is a museum or whatever, right?
Exactly,
and you want that. You want people to have it. No, this really happened. This is real. This is real. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And think about it. Even with all the memorials and stuff that we have today for the Holocaust, there are still people out there. There are factions of people out there that they are Holocaust deniers, that they say that the Holocaust did not even happen, you know? So, and I think it also has to do with that, you know, we do have this connection with our historical figures, but if you ask young people from today and like about these figures, a lot of the times they don't really even know anything about these figures. They don't know why we fought the Civil War. A lot of these things have been, you know, they've gone down the toilet. So the whole taking down the statue thing, which gets to my other point, is what is it really serving, right? So you have a lot of these people, again, with this mob mentality of, okay, let's just burn it all down, fuck it, you know, let's get rid of everything, you know. But they're not doing it for the purpose of that this is supposed to be some sort of retribution for these oppressed people. It's just like a symbolic gesture. And for what? And so our movements are being co-opted. Like what you were saying, Steve, that, okay, so we need to, you know, have some sort of economic justice sort of, like theme or, you know, demand to these movements. But, you know, in all fairness, it's not your say to say what these movements are about. Supposedly these protests were about the injustice of police brutality, specifically against people of color. That was the whole message. That was the whole point of these protests. And that's all been lost now because of all of this co-option that's been going on from freaking Nancy Pelosi with her freaking Kinde cloth scarf, you know, and those like the celebrities coming out with their black and white video, and you know, it's like it's all about putting a little black square. It's all a co-option of this movement, and so the message is totally lost, and that in itself takes away the validation of the movement. And now it's just this whole thing of, oh, well, you're just trying to erase my history, and you don't care about my history, about my pain. That's it. That's all it becomes now. You know?
All right. Well, what about if we just stick to police reform? I mean, obviously there's a Democratic bill, and maybe, I don't know if you're going to discuss that later in the show, Daisy, but you know, does that really? I mean, they're talking about like body cams and things like that, but it seems like it's you know, it's nibbling around the edges. It's not really dealing with systemic issues as far as they exist.
And how does the current climate not affect the candidacy of Joe Biden, author of the crime bill, and you know, segregationist going way back, and the continued talk about Kamala Harris, being the likely VP? I don't understand that disconnect at all.
The disconnect is that, you know, because no one else can beat Trump, therefore we have to vote for Biden. That's the
TDS.
You know, hold your nose and vote.
Syndrome.
I keep saying more and more. Yeah,
it's like that picture that I sent you, guys to the group. I don't know if you guys saw it, but it's a post by Caitlin Johnstone which she is amazing.
She's great.
Says, wanting Biden because he's not Trump is the same as wanting cancer because it's not heart disease.
Yeah, okay, I've heard that. Yeah, I've heard her say that. Yeah. Yeah, she's awesome.
Yeah. So it's totally true. But
I mean, I think the rationale is that somehow if you get Biden in office, you can push them to pass, you know, push Congress and push Biden to sign legislation. Good luck with that.
Well, isn't it the courts? Isn't that why they're pushing Biden? Because they're saying that as long as, we can't have a fully conservative court, the Supreme Court.
But
well, that's
isn't
one of the big arguments.
Pelosi is passing all his, how much fights do you hear about his, 200 judges or whatever he's passed so far? Nothing.
Didn't they fast track? Did they fast tracked a bunch of judges when before, like when this whole pandemic thing started?
Right.
Why? Because they wanted to go on their vacation.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's token resistance. I think a lot of the TDS is really based on the media regretting the part that they played in Trump winning in the first place, right? Basically, he was a big, bright, shiny object that they couldn't avoid at a time when they were really, newspapers and things were really suffering anyway. And there was a lot of problem in cable, and they basically couldn't avoid covering him because he just generated profits. And I think they're crazy to undo that. I think it's media guilt over having gotten Trump elected.
I don't know if it's so much that they feel like it's almost like buyer's remorse, more so than like I don't think that they have guilt in the sense that they feel bad about what they did. I feel that it's just now they're seeing the repercussions and they don't like it because they were too busy just looking at the dollar signs and thinking about their ratings. And they weren't thinking about the bigger effect that would have on the country and the world. At large.
I believe they thought they could have it both ways. That of course Hillary is going to win. Look at the polls. Hillary's going to win. We can show Trump to be as crazy as he is. It doesn't hurt Hillary to have the camera on him, not realizing that it actually did. I think that they basically thought they could have it both ways. That's my.
I think so. I agree with that, but I think they adapted very quickly once Trump won, and they've done very well. Obviously, that class has benefited from the tax cuts and everything, and obviously they've been attacked by Trump, but like whatever. I mean, all the partisan CNN and Fox, CNN versus MSNBC versus Fox. I mean that. I think they haven't suffered too much because of Trump winning.
But that's working off of the premise that working on that word guilt, right? So that's working on the premise that if they could change things, they would. And I just don't give them the benefit of the doubt. I feel like for them, it's just purely profit driven.
There's no guilt.
Yeah. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, some of the some of the media, headliners, new talking heads and all that do a pretty good job of being genuinely horrified by Trump. So I think some of that's genuine. So I think some of the individuals might be.
Right, but it's also a double standard with some of these, talking heads. Like they're horrified by Trump, and Trump obviously does things that are horrible, but they're not horrified when a Democrat does the same thing.
Exactly.
Oh, exactly, right.
So it's a double standard. I mean, it's just like, and sometimes Trump actually does something that's better than what Biden would do, and that's not. So it's not at all object. There's no even feeble attempt made to be objective. It's kind of just like these two camps. Unfortunately, that's what it's come down to.
Yeah.
So I was just inspired by just to talk to you guys about the state of the economy 3 months after the dreaded pandemic, right? Or into, better said, the pandemic. But I came across a story that said that Walmart is going to, they're pushing to, I think they're going to test it out in one store or a couple of stores where they're going to just go fully automated with the cashiers.
There was always a danger of this pushing that, right? Yeah, I think you brought it up before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And I feel that this pandemic has really just accelerated this whole plan for automation and really incentivized all of these companies. you know, Amazon has already been working on these things, and they're definitely going to push for it more now, especially when you had all of these protests that were coming from the workers trying to unionize and all that. And then, like I said, so Walmart, they said that they're going to test it out in either one or a few stores, and that if it works out well, then they're going to do it in all their stores. And you got to think about Walmart is the biggest employer in the United States. That is very dangerous news.
Oh, that's huge. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with Andrew Yang. I mean, automation, that's the trend that's happening, whether, you know, it's not in itself, it's not good or bad. It's just something that's happening. And yeah, people losing their jobs is bad, but I think in the bigger picture, it's an argument for that, for UBI. I mean, because what's happening is that,
I was going to say
I mean, you know, if people could work 20 hours a week and have machines do the work the rest of the week, that such a bad thing that people have more time to actually enjoy life or whatever? If we can move towards, you know, a post-job economy where people don't have to work 3 jobs to survive, maybe, you know, we can construe that as a positive thing too if it's done right. Obviously, people losing their jobs at Walmart, that's that's a negative thing, especially in the short term.
But the thing is, I mean, the regarding UBI, the good thing about that is that most of those Walmart jobs are essentially supplemented by some kind of assistance anyway, right?
Yeah.
So it's almost like it's not you're taking a job that's like a whole bunch of jobs that are, you know, where people are making 50 grand and really self-sufficient and paying their own way. You're talking about jobs where they're being horrifically underpaid, and they're probably on some kind of like food assistance or medical assistance anyway.
Well, there was that story.
So UBI in that case is like, well, this might really just make the case for UBI, which might overall have quite a beneficial effect for the country.
I mean, Walmart was intentionally hiring. This came out, whatever that story, maybe it was 5 years ago. Walmart was intentionally hiring people who were on public assistance, right? So they could, or they had health insurance, some other, you know, through Medicaid or whatever, that, you know, that they could avoid having to, whatever, they could hire part-time workers and not pay those benefits. But yeah, I think UBI is like, imagine like 2 years ago, that was like a crazy idea. No one really took it seriously. And since Andrew Yang and Tulsi has brought it up, and then, you know, Trump is doing it, you know, talking about even Republicans are talking about these payments. So things have changed a lot in a couple of years. So it's not really beyond the realm of possibility that we could be talking about some kind of regular universal basic income in a couple, you know,
I think
couple of years.
The trajectory of UBI is kind of the same as Medicare for all in how quickly I think it's been adopted in the consciousness of American voters. You know, even though, you know, the one party or two parties, however you consider it, the Republicans and Dems are both going to push back on it because it threatens profits of their, you know, corporate overlords.
Yeah, and they'll say it threatens freedom, right?
But that's what they'll say. Yeah, but you know, people I know now that would have thought that was completely crazy even a few years ago. Both those ideas now, and even free state college always kind of made sense. I think, you know, the idea of having community colleges and state colleges be so low cost that anyone basically can get in, can pay it, you know. But Medicare for all and UBI were just like fringe not that long ago, and just like it's amazing how quickly. And maybe that tells you how much people are really hurting out there. Maybe that's a great indicator of that people are like, yeah, we need something. Throw us.
Well, I think it's a way of achieving justice, you know, in a more libertarian way. Like, give people the means to decide how they're going to use that money, right? So instead of, you know, the state providing subsidized clothing or subsidized food like you had in the former Soviet Union, you give people money and let them choose how they're going to spend it. And there's still some freedom in that, so people can, you know, they can go and just blow it all at the casino or whatever, or they can actually plan and spend it on something they really need. You give people that freedom, but it's still recognizing that a lot of the wealth now is concentrated. First of all, it's being produced through automation, and it's being and it's if you just let capitalism go rampant, you know, it's where you have more and more concentration at the top, because, you know, like with the Uber phenomenon, you know, the drivers don't make very much money, but at the top they make a lot of money because the business model, it all kind of trickles up to the top.
Right.
So that's the model.
Even more so when they're all robot cars.
Yeah, right. So it's heading in that direction. So ultimately, you're
Yeah.
not going to have any physical drivers at all.
Right.
And so you see that as, oh, these people are going to lose their job. That's one way of looking at it. The other way of looking at it is, well, if we could actually take that wealth and let the person at the top, let them keep some money for recognition of what they've done, but they can't be, they can't be like Jeff Bezos, be a trillionaire. That's just obscene. How much wealth do you actually need? And like to say, put some limits on that, either through a wealth tax or income tax.
I'm like, at like 100 million, like just 100% taxation, basically.
Well, I mean, that's what you had under.
How could you ever?
You had that under Eisenhower. In 19 whatever, the late 50s, the top nominal rate was 92%. So that didn't mean they took away 92% of your money. It meant above a certain, whatever it was, $10 million, you paid 92% of every dollar you made over $10 million. And that, to me, however that works, that means the government, has to take that money back and redistributes it, or we have some kind of mechanism to recognize that the wealth, what you actually make in terms of money doesn't necessarily reflect what you actually earn or the value that you're providing to society. I mean, there's a correlation, but there's not a one-to-one correspondence. I hate it when I hear people like, Jeff Bezos, well, I worked really hard, therefore I deserve to be a trillionaire. Not that he said that, I'm just, speculating, but the idea is that, there has to be some kind of, you can't have it where one person owns more wealth than like a huge swath of the population.
Right. I mean, even these tech billionaires were like that. At some point, they wrote a really good program. It was wonderful, and then they provided some organization. At some point, like all these other people are just generating wealth for them. And the stock market and all that. It's pretty artificial. Well, and not really that indicative necessarily of their talents.
So I am also not one that's like for having people work these menial jobs, because obviously I think that it would be more meaningful for people to be able to do something that they actually like to do rather than being into forced labor, because that's the only way that they can survive, right?
Sure.
So I appreciate the idea of the UBI. The two things that I mean, obviously there are lots of arguments for and against UBI, but for me, one thing that's kind of iffy is that Yang has talked about that we should be getting paid for our data, like big tech should be, paying us for our data. And I don't know if I like that so much.
No, I do not. No. That's no good. Yeah.
Like, I don't even like that they track all the data that they do now. And I understand that he's pretty much just looking at it as like, well, they already do it, so why not just get paid for it? But I would rather them not be tracking our data, and I think that would work a lot better, right?
Yeah,
I think the other big issue that I have with UBI, and I feel like maybe a lot of maybe this is like the libertarian way of looking at it, but we've already seen with like the situation right now, post or in pandemic mode, right, where we've seen what the government is willing to do for us. Okay, so we saw how they have been fleecing us, right? How they immediately, like, it's still a question of if we're going to get another $1,200 stimulus check, okay? And everybody's freaking out, being all, hurraying over here because Trump said that, oh yeah, we're definitely going to get another one. Meanwhile, it already passed, the new act already passed in the House, and it's just sitting in the Senate, right? And they're not doing that. But what was the first order of business for them was to bail out these big companies, okay?
Oh, number one, absolutely, yeah.
We've already seen that the government does not have our best interest, as in the people.
Absolutely.
It is not at the forefront of what's important for our government, right? Because if it were, then what would have happened, instead of them bailing out all these companies, what they would have done is that they either would have, obviously done a moratorium on all sort of payments, right? Or they would have paid these debts for whatever period of time, because then the American people wouldn't be, after 4 months, you know, of having this moratorium on evictions and on foreclosures, right? They wouldn't have to be paying 4 months worth of rent, okay? And now they're gonna have these eviction notices on their doors, right?
I was going to say, if they get that 1,200 check now, that's to pay like April's.
Exactly.
Yeah,
What
yeah,
difference does that make, right?
yeah,
Like I said, instead, what they should have done is that they should have been paying these bills for people, right?
yeah.
And so then these companies, they're still solvent, right? Because
Right.
they're getting their payments,
Yeah.
okay? They don't have to go into bankruptcy. They don't have to take out any sort of loans. They don't
Right.
have to do any of that, right? And the American people, they don't have to now worry about, oh shit, you know,
Yeah.
my unemployment is about to run out. That extra $600
Oh
that
yeah.
I'm getting from unemployment is
I
about
mean,
to run out. I'm about to
you
get
know,
evicted, and I still don't have a job.
Tulsi had UBI. We said, well, we need monthly UBI for everybody for the duration of this. Like what? Back in March or something, right? She had legislation for it.
But then
And
again, but that's what I'm saying is that the
yeah,
government has proven time and time again. We already have the Princeton study that showed that we live in an oligarchy, that we don't live in a democracy. Okay,
right.
that fallacy is done. Okay,
Yeah.
and we get proven time and time again how the government, the first order of business is always to bail out the big companies and the corporations, and then maybe, I guess, we'll give you guys something. So
Daisy,
for them to be in charge of doing a UBI, that is what makes me very nervous, you know? And it's also not libertarian for us to be taking money from, like, redistributing wealth. I'm not saying that I agree with it or don't agree with it. I'm just saying, because,
Right.
you know, they were saying the whole taxing over like 100% at, you know, when you reach a certain amount. I'm totally for that. I know that obviously what before Reagan, right? Is when
No, before under Eisenhower, a Republican president in the late 50s, that was the tax rate.
it was 100%. And now
Well,
I know
not 100%, 92%.
90%. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's why I totally agree that, you know, something there needs to be a restructuring. What I'm saying is that I just don't have the faith in our government to be able to execute it.
I mean, it seems like there's an easy enough reason to I mean, Steve simply says nobody needs more than a certain amount of dollars, but it's almost like, you know, we have like monopoly laws, right? Like because people, companies become too powerful and they threaten other companies. They threaten our basically fabric of society and capitalism. If any one entity is
fail, right?
powerful, anyone is worth more than 100 million or whatever like that. It seems to me it's an invitation to political corruption and bribery and all these things that that there really is no need, and there's a public value in making sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, but it happens, right? I mean, Amazon, you look at
Right.
Microsoft, you know, these big companies or the, you know, the oil and natural gas. I mean, these, or the military industrial I mean, these, you know, that's the reality of it. And I think Princeton study it's really important because it basically showed that public opinion doesn't really make any or much of a difference in how Congress votes on issues. And one case in point is, you know, gun control or gun regulation, let's say. For instance, even among members of the NRA, gun owners, the vast majority support some kind of national gun registry. It's only the top leadership of the NRA that lobbies against that. Nevertheless, this couldn't get through Congress after, you know, I can't even remember which shooting it was, but there was, you know, a call for a national gun registry and maybe some kind of firearms training required for you to get a permit. Just common sense, not taking anyone's, you know, rights away, controlling, you know, automatic weapons, but basically, you know, giving people the right to bear arms, but just with some kind of common sense regulation. It didn't matter what public opinion was; it could not get through Congress. I know this article, the Princeton study, looked at a couple of different issues where a public opinion just does not really make a difference. So people are for breaking up these monopolies, or for, you know, therefore universal basic income or whatever, getting, you know, giving or stopping the wars. It really doesn't matter until they feel threatened. And I think, you know, the public unrest was they're like, oh shit, wait a minute, we better throw some crumbs to the crowd because this could get ugly. We better talk about police reform and do some watered down police reform so that people are happy. But
as we as we talked last week, right? It's actually interesting that there are good things that are happening, right? The no-knock warrants. There's action happening on that in Massachusetts. And what was the other one, Daisy, from last week that there was some action in Massachusetts on that was really
banning chokeholds.
Banning
Right?
it, yeah. Yeah, there were like 2 or 3 like really good things.
What you were talking about was that they were going to divert the calls from
to mental health workers.
The 911 calls that are non-violent or non.
So I agree that the thinking might be on top, that we got to throw them crumbs. But you know what? It's actually, I think some things are actually happening that will be beneficial because it doesn't hurt their profits at all to ban chokeholds or whatever.
Right. Right. Yeah. And you have to think about if we look at this as like when was it that Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated? It was when he started talking about the economic implementations and also about the wars,
the
right?
Vietnam War, right?
Yeah. Right. When he started, so when you start talking about certain issues, that is when you start to become a threat, right? And so we know by the fact that they have been appeasing us with some of these pieces of legislation that sort of stuff is okay. That doesn't really threaten them. But the big picture stuff, right?
Yeah.
Like, out of all these endless wars and and actually addressing the economic disparity that people are dealing with, that's when when I start seeing some actions really being taken in that direction, that's when I'll really know.
That's why the focus is. Oh, go ahead, Jim.
We'll give you that we'll stop killing young black men via chokeholds on the streets of New York City or Boston, but we're gonna keep blowing up school buses of black children in Yemen. We got to do that.
Right.
But here's something. I mean, I do agree with Bernie. I mean, whatever you think of Bernie Sanders, I mean, he did say ultimately the people united is a much more powerful force than the government. And so like they are threatened, the government is threatened by the people. And the historic parallel is the Magna Carta from 1215, you know, where you had the landed gentry and the serfs, you know, or actually it was the king had to give up rights to, it wasn't to the serfs, it was to the I guess like the gentry, actually give them some rights to voice their opinion. So like they were forced to do that. Another case is like the Reformation, you know, where you had parallel with religious reform, you had democratic revolt against the church, you know, in Rome. So there's this history of governments resisting rebellion, but ultimately they will give in. First, they'll give in through kind of, you know, relatively innocuous changes or reforms, but then ultimately, if their existence or their position is threatened, then they will actually, be forced to change.
Like Magna Carta.
Well, isn't that also what happened with FDR? People, they always pump up FDR as being this, you know, savior to the people, but it wasn't. It was in actuality. Well, one, it was also Eleanor Roosevelt.
Right.
Roosevelt was extremely progressive,
right.
But also it was the fact that he saved capitalism, right? It was that, you know, all the socialists and the communists, they were all coming together and they were pushing for this movement of economic equality, I guess.
Right. And you know, there was a coup attempt against Roosevelt, which, you know, you don't learn about in schools, but there was a coup attempt in the early 30s against Roosevelt where Smedley Butler, you know, who wrote War is a Racket, he was actually enlisted. He was a war hero, and he was enlisted by several Wall Street, you know, connected people to basically stage a coup and overthrow FDR, and he refused. Smedley Butler refused.
So I'm dying to say this, but you brought up Bernie in the context of the discussion about the biggest governance problems such as war, and he just put across like a bill to reduce the military budget by 10%.
Yeah.
Didn't we just raise it by 10%? Isn't he basically giving them that isn't that a huge nothing burger?
It's like you have to differentiate between real change and cosmetic change, and like even 10% is huge, but I mean if you raise it 10%, then you lower 10%. Okay,
Yeah, then we're only 9.5 times the military budget of the next country.
It's like the Bush tax cuts. Remember Obama? Bush said they're just temporary, and then Obama came in and made them permanent. And it's like, even if Obama came in and said, well, we're gonna get rid of the tax cuts, I mean, it would have been bringing it back to what the status quo ante, but it really wouldn't have been radical change. So I mean, I think there's a difference between, like you say, Daisy, like it's real change that actually costs them something, and change that's kind of like cosmetic. I mean, look at identity politics for the Democrats. I mean, it's very inexpensive to say, and nothing, they're valid, obviously valid concerns, women's rights, gay rights, whatever. But in the scheme of things, it's relatively cheap to enact that as opposed to actual economic reform, and then I think we're heading to the point where, people are waking up, and eventually, whether it's this round or the next round or whatever, but right now we're in kind of a perfect storm with all these things coming together with the pandemic and with George Floyd, that maybe this is the time it's going to happen, or maybe it will be another, 4 years. But, also we got climate change too. So we got all these things coming to a head. To me, it's an opportunity to get organized and push for an agenda, and not just nationally. I think globally. I think we should be pushing for justice. In terms of basic rights. Whether it's universal basic income, the right to basic medical care. I'm not saying that whatever. Not elective surgery, fine.
You didn't have to go broke or homeless.
Exactly. Like if you have to pay something to go to.
Such a radical idea.
I know it.
Well, I mean, like, when you used to go to community college in the 70s, whatever, it cost you like, $400 a semester, probably not even that much, So like,
right.
Okay, you had to work a job to pay for it, but you didn't get saddled with debt when you graduated, So like, it seems to me like there should be a program to say this is what we're calling for, and we shouldn't be pie in the sky. It should just be like, okay, this is what we want. We want heavily subsidized public education, post-secondary education. We want universal basic income. We want basic medical care, healthcare guaranteed. We want environmentally, we want something to do something about environmental catastrophe. So I mean, there are all these different things, and it seems like there's so much resistance to that, but it seems like we have to get organized around, and not just a candidate, like a movement. What did you say, Daisy?
A coalition.
A coalition, but we kind of have to be like, well, we're not gonna vote for your Biden guy, we're not gonna vote for your Trump guy, we're gonna vote for wherever, it's not just the Democrats, it goes beyond that. We're gonna vote for a candidate who says, I support 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, these things. That's the minimum. And this should be a global movement. Let's get, because you have a movement, you have it in Germany, they're protesting about George Floyd. It's not just limited to this country. Let's get everybody on board and say, look, we're in this together. We're in a global society. We need to fight for these basic rights, in Russia too. And they're probably not going to be too happy about it, like Putin or whatever. I mean, everyone's going to have to adjust to it. But it seems to me like the time is ripe to call for that kind of global movement, and not the Communist International of 100 years ago or 90 years ago. I'm talking about actually a popular movement that's unified around a program, and it could take the form of a coalition in this country or whatever.
You damn globalist.
Well, I'm not going beyond the globe. I mean, we'll deal with the solar system later, but I think,
You galaxyist.
Did you see that? It just came out that according to the Drake equation, the Drake equation, which talks about the possibility of intelligent life in the universe, and it's based on, well, if there's this many stars and this many stars have planets and this many planets are this far away from their stars and this many stars, they could have the conditions with water or whatever, then so they just came out that there's the latest thing was that in the Drake equation, there's probably 36 advanced intelligent civilizations in our galaxy, which to me seems really small. But anyways, that's a very conservative estimate. So, but for now, let's just stick with our planet. Okay.
Okay.
I mean, I think sovereignty is an antiquated idea, and I think I don't know. I'm not an exceptionalist. I don't believe in exceptionalism. I think everybody has good and bad, and I think you have to and I think the American experiment's a great thing, but it's also gone wrong. So we have to look at both the good and the bad. This year is the 75th anniversary of the end of World War II in Europe, and because D-Day was 1944, but the Germans surrendered, I think, the first week of May in 1945. And our friend Vlad Putin wrote an article about World War II from the Russian perspective, which was kind of a reaction to the European Parliament coming out with a statement last year blaming Russia for starting World War II. Basically, the World War II started with this Hitler, Stalin, or the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact in 1939, where the Russians and the Germans agreed to divide Poland. So Putin wrote kind of in response to that, wrote this long article in the National Interest magazine. I'm not even sure, it's probably an RT front or something. I don't know what it is, but basically saying, talking about the sacrifices that the Russian nation made, and that his own experiences, and then talking about why they entered into this agreement with Nazi Germany, and talking about some other things in there. And I thought it's interesting because I did read through it pretty carefully, and I think both sides are right and both sides are wrong in terms of what we learn here in the West and what Putin put into his explanation for the Russian understanding of World War II. So number one, the West did not defeat the Germans starting on D-Day, because basically in 1944 the war was pretty much I wouldn't say winding down, but it was clear that Germany was going to be, and as well as Japan, were going to be defeated. And it certainly hastened the end of the war, and it was an important factor in the end of the war. But Putin makes the point that out of the Americans who participated in the war, I'm not sure if it's all Americans, it was like the number of Americans who lost their lives was like 1 out of 387 or something like that, whereas in Russia it was like 1 out of 7. So they took the brunt of the Nazi onslaught, which was in 1941 when Hitler invaded Russia. So or I should say the Soviet Union. So basically, Belarus, Ukraine, as well as Russia, as well as other parts of the Soviet Union, were invaded by the Nazis, and they lost tens of millions of people. And basically, they turned the war around in Stalingrad, and were able to come back and push the Nazis back into Germany and arrive in Berlin in May of 1945. So, but Putin also talks about the Baltic republics, okay, because as a result of the Hitler-Stalin Pact in 1939, there were some secret protocols, and as a result of that, it was agreed that Poland would be divided between the Nazis and the Russians, and that the Soviets would have a sphere of influence in the Baltic states, essentially giving them a green light to militarily take over Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania. And what happened in reality was that they were basically threatened by the Soviet states, saying, if you don't become part of the Soviet Union, we're going to invade you and forcibly make you part of the Soviet Union. And so this is what Putin wrote. He said, in autumn 1939, the Soviet Union, pursuing its military and defensive goals, started the process of incorporation of Latvia, Lithuania, and Estonia. Their accession to the USSR was implemented on a contractual basis with the consent of the elected authorities. This was in line with international and state law of that time. So what he's basically saying is that they reached some kind of agreement, a contract, and that, basically they were, at the other end of the barrel of a gun, and they agreed, rather than try to fight it, they agreed to become part of the Soviet Union. And this was in line with international state law of that time, implying that nowadays that wouldn't work. I think Putin justifiably deserves criticism for kind of rewriting history. But in a larger sense, I think there has to be a more balanced view of the role of Russia in World War II and the defeat of the Nazis, and that yes, they were pursuing their own interest, but if they did not reach an agreement with the Nazis in 1939, probably the Nazis would be that much closer to Moscow, and they got within 8 to 12 miles of Moscow. People don't know this, but they were very close to taking over Moscow in 1941. And if they hadn't had that extra buffer, there's a good chance that regime would have collapsed. So it was in that sense, Putin is right. It was a matter of survival for them. And I just think it's interesting how it's all black and white in the press. Like, Putin is bad, we're good, whatever. I think, it's a lot more subtle than just, one side is right, one side's wrong.
Well, when I heard about that article, what they were talking about was that I guess the purpose of him writing it was almost like a warning to the West about committing historical revisionism.
Yeah, because according to the West, according to the statement by the European Parliament, World War II started with the Hitler-Stalin Pact on August 23rd, 1939. And I think that's just not true. And I think, and even people in the West have said that's just not true, because the roots for World War II were sown in were laid in World War I. So basically, it had been in the making for a long, long time. And you have to look at all these things. I mean, Poland was carved up by Germany and Russia, but the reality is that Poland was not a country, a sovereign country, between like 1796 and 1919. I mean, it was divided between the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and the Austro-Hungarian Empire. There was no country of Poland. So that was the Russian sphere of influence under the Tsarist period, that part of Poland. So Warsaw was part of the Russian Empire. So I mean, you have to look at the historical context. Not that justifies their invading Poland, and also the atrocities that both sides committed in Poland. I mean, there's a famous massacre that took place in 1940, I believe, in Katyn Forest, where all the elite of the Polish officers were rounded up and summarily executed on orders of Lavrenti Beria, who was the interior minister under Stalin, head of the secret police. And this was like tens of thousands of officers were murdered, and the Nazis, made a big deal about this. And the Soviets said, well, the Nazis did this. And they finally, in 1990, the Soviets admitted that, yes, we did that. But there were also massacres, in the same location by the Nazis a few years later. So it's like both sides are not without sin.
Yeah, and it's funny because it almost reminds me of the Thanksgiving revisionism, historical revisionism that has happened. Where like, we don't want to talk about how American companies were actually making money off of helping the Germans, helping the Nazis, you know, with a lot of their, you know, like building a lot of these concentration camps, and you know, like then, and you know, the pieces of the artillery that they were using, like a lot of these things, American companies were actually pivotal to the, you know, their success.
Right. And the primary,
And the fact that Russia they lost so many, right? But in, you know, looking back at it now, people only remember how America came and saved the day, and that's it, and won the war for everybody.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
and it's like I said, it almost reminds me of what's happened with Thanksgiving. How, you know, really what happened was a massacre of people, right?
Right.
And how these people were essentially enslaved by the pilgrims that came here. They didn't have this wonderful dinner. They sat down and shared all their things. You know, that's not what happened. But that's, you know, that's not the story that's told to everybody. You know, and you know.
Well, it's just like, you know, the founding fathers, you know, the cognitive dissonance of thinking of the founding fathers as slave owners, you know, because that wasn't even really talked about, you know, more than maybe 20 or 30 years ago. It first came up as a real, you know, concept. So now it's now that, you know, they're going after these statues or whatever. But I think, yeah, you have this popular narrative of what history is, and then you have the reality. So like this statement that was the European Parliament issued last year condemning the Soviet Union, basically blaming the Soviet Union for starting World War II and lumping together Nazi Germany and the Soviet Union, Stalinist Soviet Union as totalitarian states. I think that's revisionist history as well, because, you know, they were both totalitarian, yes, but there is no equivalence between Stalin's Russia and Hitler's Germany. I mean, Germany was a genocidal project that was, you know, I mean, there's no parallel to you know, there's certain similarities in terms of totalitarian structure, but in terms of what their mission was, yes, they're both bent on world conquest, so to speak, but I don't think there's an equivalence between the two, and to say that, I think really grossly oversimplifies history.
So I was thinking recently, hearing that Epstein keeps coming back in the news. The most recent thing was that Dershowitz, as part of his apparent defense, is really kind of trying to deflect, basically say, I don't know, you know, look at all these really powerful people she's accusing. That would be Virginia Roberts, right? The main complainant. So he has access to, you know, documents that she submitted of all these people that supposedly, you know, raped some of the girls, or raped her, or were seen on the island, etc. And you know, and so Dershowitz has kind of like, you know, been releasing all these names. It just got me thinking about this thing that, again, I don't understand the Teflon coating on the Clintons. How this stuff can be so obvious that their level of involvement in these crimes, and they just never suffer the consequences. I want to show one thing, and again, the American media will never show anything like this, but in this case, I'm looking at a from the Daily Mail, right? Again, foreign media might show it, U.S. media will never show it. That there's this picture. I don't know if you guys have seen it before, with Ghislaine Maxwell at Chelsea Clinton's wedding, and this is well after all the pedophilia charges came out, and she was in that. She got off on basically because they made that ridiculous deal, obviously, but it was well known at that point she was a pedophile and a monster that at the very least procured all these girls, hundreds of girls, for Epstein. But there are specific charges against her, also molesting a lot of these these
Well,
girls.
wait a sec, because I mean, in Florida, Epstein was convicted not of pedophilia. He was convicted of
Prostitution,
Right,
soliciting.
which is another slandering of these girls, basically saying that they were prostitutes when they were not. And just the fact that the whole horrific case is just unbelievable. Um, but I just can't believe that this picture isn't like on American news. Well, I can believe it, but that's the conspiracy part, is how can this picture exist and not be on the news all the time, like that picture of Virginia Roberts and Prince Andrew has been on quite a bit.
well, for the same
Uh,
reason that Ghislaine Maxwell has been being totally ignored. I mean, like
yeah,
where is she? Like, is she in Paris, or is she where? I mean,
and
it's just
that's the conspiracy reel at the heart of this, is that basically the worldwide, the rich and powerful essentially are still operating a pedophilia ring, and keeping her hidden away so that she can't divulge what she knows about, the Epstein branch or corner of that horrific world. Um, so it's just amazing to me that this picture wouldn't be out there all the
right.
time.
Well, see,
And what?
I'd be interested to know how often they put Prince Andrew's connection to this whole thing. Like how much in the Daily Mail they would talk about that, about Prince Andrew,
Yes.
rather than Bill Clinton.
And that's a different, and that's the difference. That's the difference between like the UK media, right, which will go after this stuff. And basically, Prince Andrew was basically shamed and dropped out of any kind of official duties as a royal because of this. And Hillary Clinton is still, nominating people for positions in government or whatever, endorsing people. That Engel just recently came out with an endorsement, just have to hide her head in shame at all. So I just don't understand that break, and really the only explanation is some kind of power behind the scenes, whether it is that they hold bribable pictures against people, or something behind the scenes. They have this level of power that's just inconceivable.
Well, what happened to all the evidence? I mean, they went through Epstein's townhouse in New York and took away, pallets of boxes and files and everything like that, and black book and everything. Yeah, the FBI raided, right? And so what happened to all that? That stuff. Another angle is, in the Southern District of New York, Berman was just fired by Trump, and he was maybe getting too close to some of the stuff. I mean, I know Klump
Klump is a good name.
Slip.
Yeah, it's good
Trump distanced himself from Epstein, but there may be some connections going back before, before the 20 years ago or whatever, because there's a lot of pictures again of him together with Epstein, I believe. So, and as far as what people how they would respond, why aren't you seeing this picture more often? I think first of all, the Daily Mail is a quote unquote tabloid, and I think they would just say, well, it's not a reliable source. Maybe it was a doctored photo, whatever. I think it's not considered journalism in the same level. And I'm just saying this is their argument, as New York Times or something.
Right, but I'm giving you one source of this picture.
Right, but I mean, has it been in other, more quote unquote reputable sources?
Yeah, again,
as well?
it might be only like in the Sun and the Daily and things like that would be said to be like the National Enquirer here, which has come up with very valid things that the other real media won't dig up.
I mean, the Daily Mail, so it's probably on the level of like Boston Herald. I mean, it's above the National Enquirer, but it's not considered, the Times or something.
So we have to remember that in the phone interview with Whitney Webb that Maria Farmer did, she talked about how the FBI they had known about this for how long, and she had reported this whole thing to the FBI. And like, if I'm not mistaken, it was the thing with her and the thing with her sister. Both things were reported to the FBI. What was it, like 20 years ago?
Yeah.
A ridiculous amount of time before. And even in the Netflix docuseries, they talk about how, you know, the FBI, if I'm not mistaken, the police chief in West Palm Beach had actually, because he was starting to see that there was something going on with the district attorney, I believe, that he wasn't pursuing the case. He took it to the FBI, and then the case just like
Oh yeah.
disappeared.
Oh,
You know
and
what
I
I'm
think
saying? They didn't really do anything about it, and that really does go to show that they both had a lot of power, because the fact that she is still able to be free, who do you know would be able to commit these
right.
things, these
Yeah.
atrocities, and not be at least brought in for
Yeah,
questioning?
and I do want to add. I do want to get it. I do want to get in that they said that not only was the FBI, they appeared like non-committal and not interested. They were like aggressive, like to the point of being, you know, she was saying it was like hurtful the way they were going about like interrogating her. It was like accusational, and it was all sorts of stuff that was basically a really horrific experience that the FBI, you know, subjected her to.
I think it's interesting. I think you have to give Sagar and Jetty of The Hill Rising a lot of
Yes.
credit. I don't agree with him on a lot of things, but I think his pushing this story is really to his credit, and he's really done a good job. The last story, it was just a couple of days ago, where he showed that picture of Ehud Barak um,
No.
with with a scarf in front of his. This is before
Yes.
COVID, with a scarf covering his face, and the excuse was, well, it was cold. I mean,
Yeah.
and it
No. So,
wasn't
so to clarify, what you're talking about is former Prime Minister of Israel having spent the night at
correct.
Epstein's
Correct.
place in New York when he said
Yes.
he like barely knew him at that point or something like that.
Right.
And young girls were seen coming and going
Yes.
while
Yes.
he was
Yes.
there
Exactly.
overnight. Yeah.
Exactly. So it's
Yeah.
very suspicious, and then you get into that whole connection, you know, with foreign intelligence or whatever, and obviously it's all a big soup of conspiracy at this point. But it seems like, yeah, I mean, the circumstantial evidence seems to point in that direction. I
Oh
mean,
yeah.
and Epstein's death itself too. I mean, it's very suspicious. So, but
Yeah.
I think you do have to give Sagar a lot of credit for pushing this story.
And
And
he says he will not drop it. He's vehement about that.
right, unless he's, I
Yeah.
mean, but obviously, very powerful interests do not want the story
Right.
to see the light of day. You know, they want to keep it covered up.
Right. Yeah, and of course,
Let's see if he goes the way of that. What was it, Amy Rohrbach or whatever her name was, the one from the ABC, the one who I had it all.
Oh yeah. She
Uh,
literally said in that interview, "I had the Clintons. I had." Yeah, right.
It
so
wasn't
let's
an
see
interview.
how far soccer can go with it. You
That
know,
wasn't an
Yeah.
yes,
interview
obviously
though.
give credit to him, but
Well, in the interview, oh, you're right. That was the tape that was over.
It was a
That was,
tape, right?
oh yeah,
Right.
yeah, that's right. Yeah, yeah.
They never would have allowed her to put that on the air.
Right. Yeah.
And that's why actually she wasn't fired, but it was the person who worked for that network who later went to CBS. She was fired.
allegedly, because
Yeah.
it's not, it wasn't proven that it was her. A lot of people say that they just used her as a scapegoat.
Okay.
Oh, and I'll also say the fact that Israeli prime minister was there, it kind of is interesting in the light of some conspiracy that are out there that Epstein is really an MI5 spy, and so was Ghislaine Maxwell, and et cetera, because her father had been known to be, and this was all about just getting photographic evidence that can be used for bribing and for manipulating U.S. politicians, essentially, or politicians all around the world. It's kind of interesting that he was.
Well, the thing is that
yeah.
Epstein did, you know, if you were really trying to blackmail people and make a lot of money off this thing, don't you think you would just go after really rich people as opposed to politicians? I mean,
Right.
the reason, you know,
Well, it's control. It's political control.
it's getting them in a compromising position, and then they can you know, use that for control, right? So
Oh
who's
yeah.
interested in that? Who, you know, try to connect the threads there, but who's interested in that? Foreign governments obviously would be very interested in that
Right.
ability, right?
And one of the main reasons why people are so suspicious of, or they suspect that that Epstein had made had become as powerful and as known as he did because of the people that he was, rolling with, and the type of damaging sort of information that he had on people, because it's inexplicable how much money he made and like how he made his money.
Oh yeah, they have no idea. Yeah.
Right.
Well,
Yeah, they have no idea where the money came from. It just was there. Yeah.
And Les Wexner bought him the townhouse in New York, right, for way under market rate.
For
or gave
$1.
him the townhouse.
Wasn't it like $1?
Sold it to him, right? Yeah. So I mean, there's a lot of and the documentary. I don't know if Saga said that or somebody, but basically it's kind of a whitewash. I mean, it deals with it has some of the Maria Farmer.
I said that. He didn't say that.
Well, I think it's somebody else.
They actually had, I think it was the producer, the director. They had her on the other day.
Oh, she was horrible.
See, I didn't get that at all. I thought they had another person put Clinton on the islands. They had this other technical guy that was just running around fixing servers or something.
Right.
Saying he saw Clinton on the island. The women were extremely believable and in giving and telling their stories. And they were saying they think girls are dead. They think there were hundreds of girls that were involved that they saw come and go. Where are they? They think a lot of them are dead.
But what about do they talk about the the Israeli Mossad connection, with Ghislaine Maxwell's father, Robert Maxwell, and I mean, there's do they even broach the subject at all?
I don't believe so. I don't remember that happening.
No. I saw it. No.
Which I mean, it should be mentioned.
It should be mentioned. Yeah.
Just because it's part of the whole story.
Well, it wasn't a complete telling, but to me, the biggest fact, the fact that they went after Clinton and the fact that it was the women are given such a chance to tell their story and they're so believable that I thought it was, worthwhile to open the door for people being curiosity. And it got huge views. It was like #1. Like miniseries or something. I don't know. It was #1 in some category while it was on or whatever.
I tell you, if some politician wanted to take that up as a topic, running for president, I think people would vote for that because they're like, fuck this. Like, we got to get the truth out about. People really think there's some kind of cabal, conspiracy, or whatever. And I don't think it's necessarily that type of thing. But obviously there's corruption and a relatively small number of very powerful interests have undue influence. And so, Trump actually ran on that to some degree in 2016. I think somebody ran on, saying I'm gonna expose Epstein or whatever. All these other people, like, they all have ties to Epstein. Trump, Clinton, Bush, like they're all like connected. So I don't.
So Biden actually doesn't, that I can see. I've actually looked for that and I can't find any ties with Biden. Obama stays aloof on all this sexual stuff. I mean, he doesn't see, he kills people in other countries, but he himself doesn't get entangled, hasn't seemed to ever get entangled in that kind of stuff.
But I wonder if one of the new up and coming younger generation, like you look at like Booker and Bowman and these different people, if they're going to actually start, pushing for some of these, investigations where investigations are due. I mean, come on. It's just like, is it just going to be a Netflix documentary and then we're going to just say that's it, and we're going to
yeah, I would
stop with that?
I mean, we have, without putting too much on Booker and Bowman's shoulders, we have a lot of hope that they can take care of these other high priorities as well. I mean, abuse
Obviously,
of the poor by the wealthy is what we're talking about in general, right?
I'm just saying the fact that it got so many views on Netflix means that it does resonate with people, and that it's like a hot potato. People don't want to touch it, but it seems like somebody, I could see somebody trying to putting that on their platform or something, and people would respond to that.
It would be interesting to check to see if every time the Hill Rising does a segment on that, do their views go up considerably? Because he's had like 5 or 6 different segments on it. Things keep coming up.
Yeah, it's interesting to see where it's going to go.
Absolutely.
Ready? Legislative Week in Review. Here we come.
All right.
All right. So for the Legislative Week in Review, I really only had two things that I wanted to talk about this time. So the first thing, which you alluded to earlier, Steve, was the HR 7120, the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act of 2020. It just passed in the House on June 25th. It was predominantly Democrat heavy. As you can see, it had 230 Democratic co-sponsors. And the bill passed at 236 to 181. So obviously it was a heavily partisan bill, which doesn't bode well for its passage in the Senate, right? So just like a quick synopsis of it. So this bill addresses a wide range of policies and issues regarding policing practices and law enforcement accountability. It includes measures to increase accountability for law enforcement misconduct, to enhance transparency, which that word, transparency, and data collection, and to eliminate discriminatory policing practices. So among other things, it does the following. So it lowers the criminal intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless. To convict a law enforcement officer for misconduct in a federal prosecution limits qualified immunity, which is a good one, right, as a defense to liability in a private civil action against a law enforcement officer or state correctional officer, and authorizes the Department of Justice to issue subpoenas in investigations of police departments for a pattern or practice of discrimination. The bill also creates a national registry, the National Police Misconduct Registry, to compile data on complaints and records of police misconduct. It establishes a framework to prohibit racial profiling at the federal, state, and local levels. The bill establishes new requirements for law enforcement officers and agencies, including to report data on use of force incidents, to obtain training on implicit bias and racial profiling, and to wear body cameras. So like you were saying, Steve, it goes, but it doesn't go far enough, right? The fact that I think the National Registry is something that's really important that's added to there, because I think there was one case where, obviously this is more prevalent than just one case, but there was one case that was reported of a police officer who he had a slew of violent interactions or reprimands on his record, but and he ended up being fired, and then he just ended up going like a few towns over and getting a job, and then he ended up killing someone. So that is obviously a big deal. I really would have liked to have seen something similar to what we're going to see in Boston, hopefully, with the whole diverting the calls. I think that should have been something that was included in here. But again, we have to start somewhere, right? The limiting the qualified immunity, that's something good. And also the fact that it changes the intent standard from willful to knowing or reckless. I think that also, especially, with this whole debate of, first degree, second degree, or third degree, and how it's really hard to prove a first degree murder, but, or at least to get those charges to stick, right? It's really hard for something like that, but if you change this intent, I think that can add a little bit of
yeah, you really want to be something like a person leaning on a person's windpipe for 8 minutes. It's reasonable to expect that a reasonable man would know, or person would know, that that's going to cause injury or death.
Right.
Yeah.
Or even the fact that, like, what a lot of people don't talk about is that when in a lot of these videos that we've seen where these men are, they're running away, a good majority of the time they're running away. So how is that putting your life, if you're a police officer, how is that putting your life in danger If the person is running away from you, how
Right.
is that
But
an imminent
but
threat to your life?
I've had this discussion. I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Yeah.
The cop is also responsible for the little black child around the corner, right? If you allow someone to get away and he actually has a weapon or is dangerous, that I don't know how to deal with that. As far as what the law should be, it seems to me that if a dangerous person is almost a weapon, you let that person get away and he harms somebody else, the cop's kind of legally responsible, isn't he?
But the thing is that, so what are you considering like a threat, right? But you're assuming that all of these people are all like violent criminals. When
No,
the
no,
law
I'm saying no, no, I'm saying every case is different. I'm saying if
right. But
somebody,
but in a good
yeah,
majority of these cases, at least that we've seen the video of it. Obviously we can't speak for things that we haven't
Right.
seen.
yeah, specific
In
cases,
these
yes,
videos, we're seeing how these people are running away. They're not,
right,
and it's just because they don't want to be, like what happened with Rashard Brooks, right? The fact that, I mean, I do understand that he ended up taking the taser away from the police officers or whatever,
right.
but he was running away and he hadn't committed a violent crime. So
Yep.
how is it that you can't use that justification in that?
No, I think in his case, you would not have the. I mean, whether or not he was drunk, and a taser is a weapon that is dangerous to some people if they're young or feeble or whatever, have a heart condition, but it's not, the chances of something having happened from that are seems extremely low. I don't think there was any reason to think he had any intent to do anybody any harm. That he
Right.
was,
I actually saw the video
right.
of the whole altercation. Like it was like over an hour they were with him,
Yeah.
and you could tell the conversation was like super pleasant. The way that it went about, it didn't have to end up with maximum justice being applied to him, where now he had to die. They could have very well just treated it as, all right, let's get him a ride home. We're going to give him a ticket, or, you know what I'm saying? It's like something else. But
Right.
instead, this man ended up losing his life on his daughter's birthday, no less.
Right.
Right. Yeah.
What does this have to do with the bill, though, per se?
Oh, I was just, well, it's the whole, like I said, the whole willful to knowing or reckless. That is reckless behavior, or the police officer has to know that if they're shooting someone who is running away from them, and they shoot them 3 times or however many times that they have to know that their intent is that they're going to harm this person. They're going to kill them.
Right. But I mean, it doesn't remove.
Well, my bad.
Yeah, but it
Yeah.
doesn't remove the whole problem of, warrior mentality versus community policing. And I think this
Yeah.
bill is fine as far as it goes. But for instance, body cameras, they're very limited. I mean, you should require dashboard cameras as well, at the very least. And also, you should have some kind of community involvement in running these police departments. They should be. You shouldn't have it run by these rogue union chiefs or whatever. I mean, there has to be community input into the police departments.
What do you mean specifically? The entire running of the police department, or the disciplinary procedures?
I'm talking about running the
Okay.
police department. Just like in Germany, in the corporations, you have worker representation on the boards. You have to have community representation in police departments because they are the connection, the conduit between the state and the community. I mean, they are like between the law and everyday people. So you need to have that input, and that might help create more trust and help prevent these kinds of attitudes, which seem to me are endemic in some of these police departments. Not all, but some of them. You just don't see it as much in a lot of other countries. You see it here for whatever reasons, historic or otherwise. But I think, and then, militarization, all that type of thing. But I think it's not like, is militarization, for instance, is that addressed in this bill? I don't think so. I think we need more comprehensive. And again, it's a case. This bill is a case of the powers that be giving a few crumbs, and that's it. It's good, but it's like, okay, so you're giving us like 3% instead of 80%, right? Like it's going to be like, it's really going to not really going to change things. And what Minneapolis is doing, whether you agree with it or not, that's radical. I mean, they're dissolving the police department and building it from the ground up. And it may or may not succeed. I don't know. But I think we need a much more comprehensive approach to police reform, and this bill isn't it.
I agree.
Yeah, civilian boards make a lot of sense. I mean, whether or not it's just for disciplinary, at the minimal for disciplinary issues, but definitely, I agree with you that the atmosphere might be completely different if there are civilians, that are part of the policeman's everyday life as part of the structure of the police force. You might not have such a militaristic attitude develop.
It's just that, like, right now, everything is insular. It's controlled by the police department. So if there's an investigation, there's an internal investigation, right? So, I mean, it's just, let's just make it a little bit more, have some more community input. It doesn't mean that the citizens have to dominate the board or run the board. It just means they have to have representation on the board so their voice is heard. And I think you need more than just, in these specific cases of abuse or misconduct. I think you need to have representation in general. I mean, that seems to me like, how could that hurt? Unless, from the militarized police point of view, maybe it would hurt them because you have people who are going to object to that. But I don't really see an objection.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So, like I said, I agree with you that it doesn't go anywhere near far enough, but I guess we gotta celebrate whatever sort of crumbs.
Yeah.
Hey, incrementalism, yay!
Yeah.
Yeah.
So this one's kind of for you, Jim. I think you're gonna like this one. Okay. So this second one that I wanted to talk about is HR 7343, which, as you can see, it says to limit the use of funds to reduce the number of armed forces deployed to Afghanistan and for other purposes. So this was introduced by Jason Crow on June 25th, 2020. So it says here that there isn't any text available, but there actually is text available.
Woo!
I don't know why. So it's only 13 pages long. It's not too bad. But when we got to talk about this whole Orwellian speak. All right, so it says this act may be cited as the Afghanistan Partnership and Transparency Act. So, yeah, exactly. You already know with this title, it's bullshit, right? And so, all right, so.
Well, can you look at section 2 there? To me, being an editor, that's not, it's not even clear. Limitation on use of funds to reduce deployment to Afghanistan. So that means you're going to limit the funds you would use to reduce deployment, or is it actually
used to reduce deployment?
Are you trying to use
reduce
funds?
Deployment.
What do you need funds to reduce deployment? Because obviously you're going to, it might be a limitation of use of funds to maintain deployment. That would make sense. Or that you're going to cut funds for maintain deployment, but why would you use funds to reduce
deployment? Would be like telling people the truth about the misuse of our troops being there.
To me, it's just not clear from that section 2 title what they actually.
And the whole bill is kind of like that. It's like really back and forth with a lot of the information. All right, so like I said, it was introduced on the 25th. It has been referred to now to the Armed Services and the Foreign Affairs Committee. And it has 3 co-sponsors: Liz Cheney, Michael Waltz, and Susan Davis. So obviously, when I saw Liz Cheney's name attached to this, my eyes lit up. I was like, Liz Cheney, which obviously she's on these committees, and that's why whatever. But Liz Cheney is who?
Daughter of
Dick Cheney's daughter.
Cheney,
exactly.
Oh yeah,
exactly. Yep, that's her. And so I just wanted to see what type of messaging came out about this, because I just thought, I don't know, Liz Cheney kind of seems like a warmonger, I would imagine, right? I don't really know all that much about her, but if she's anything like her dad, We know that she's a bloodthirsty warmonger, right? And then, but I feel like this bill is something that's being presented, and it should be a positive thing, right? That they want to reduce the number of people there.
Well,
right?
is that it? Could you scroll down a little bit there, Daisy?
Hold on,
Yeah.
man, I'm going.
Come on.
I know, I'm all like that too. I want to see that quote.
Okay, all right. So this is what she says. Okay, so she says the Al-Qaeda allied Taliban continues to wage deadly attacks across Afghanistan. Al-Qaeda leaders continue to find safe haven there from which to plot attacks, and the Islamic State continues to conduct active operations there. America's troop presence in Afghanistan is critical to ensuring the safety of the American people at home, right?
Is this, can we also call this the Don't Ever Read the Afghan Papers Act? Is that what this is?
Exactly. This is exactly what I was thinking when I read this. I was like, you gotta be fucking shitting me. All right. But the U.S. Taliban deal allows for premature troop withdrawal that is not conditions-based. This legislation will help ensure that Congress and the American people are fully informed about America's withdrawal from Afghanistan and the impact it is having and will have on our security.
Okay.
Which is just like, she's on the Foreign Affairs Committee, so you know that they are getting these reports on what's going on over there. So she is saying that the Afghanistan papers were false. You know what I'm saying?
Right. That's what she's saying. Yeah, that's what all this means. Yeah, basically saying, or we refuse to read it, or we don't think the American public even knows about it, so we're going to pretend it doesn't exist.
Right.
Yeah.
And then one of the other warmongers that that talked about this was, hold on. Yeah, so it was Representative Michael Waltz and Susan Davis, which Susan Davis is more at the bottom. But as a Green Beret and veteran of the War on Terror, my duty was to protect America from terrorist threats and the Taliban that gave them safe harbor to operate within Afghanistan. And I know they are still intent on harming Americans and destabilizing the region, said Representative Waltz. Extremism still lingers in Afghanistan, where many terrorists remain, plotting their next deadly move.
Our next deadly move.
Dude, are you fucking kidding me? Withdrawing American troops prematurely could open the door for a re-escalation of violence and could be a step backwards for the hard-fought gains made for women, religious minorities.
Oh, God.
This is what we're there for, you know? Religious minorities and regional stability. This is why Congress and the American people must be fully aware of the impacts of troop withdrawal on our national security.
What about the poppy trade? He didn't mention that.
No, for some reason there's no mention of that. And, dropping the mother of all bombs, like that whole thing. Like, who even cares about that, right? But then, so the person that actually wrote this bill, so Jason Crow, he actually had something good to say. So I served in Afghanistan, and I know firsthand what makes the U.S. military the strongest in the world. But I also know the limitations of military power. If there was a military solution to the war in Afghanistan, we would have found it long ago. The war in Afghanistan must end, but we must do so in a way that ensures lasting peace. The world is watching to see whether America keeps its promises. Very important, keeps its promises. This bill is transformative in its ability, which it's not, in its ability to ensure that we keep our promise to the women and children of Afghanistan, to our partners and allies in peacekeeping, and to a safer and more secure world order.
The poor women and children,
Yeah.
We have.
Meanwhile, if you actually read the bill, it goes through. So this is quickly what it is. It's supposed to be that they want to bring the troop level down to 8,000 and 5,000, but there's all these hoops that they have all these caveats, right? So that it doesn't compromise our mission. That's the first thing, the first caveat, right? In order for this to actually come true or come to fruition, is that it doesn't compromise our mission. It doesn't risk US personnel in Afghanistan. It doesn't increase the risk of groups expanding. So like these terrorist groups or whatever, them not expanding. And it needs to be okayed with US allies and NATO, and is in our best interest, right? So it states all of those things first, and then it says if it's to the benefit of Afghanistan. Then it talks about all these things, which I just thought was just so disgusting, right? And of course, if you're gonna have somebody like Liz Cheney co-sponsoring this, what can you really expect?
I'm going on Twitter now, seeing if we can get like Tulsi Gabbard to comment on this thing.
I don't know. What do you guys think?
Just given the, I think it's just, I don't know, just given the fact that they're talking about the danger to America from Afghanistan and Al Qaeda is like, it's horrific.
Remember that report that came out like 15 or 20 years ago, or not too long after 9/11, that Afghanistan has this incredible mineral wealth of certain rare minerals that is, so like, I think that plays a role here too. I mean, and lasting peace means we want, corporations to be able to go in there and extract whatever they can, without the threat of terrorist attacks. Right.
Right. Okay, and then the last thing that I wanted to mention about this was that this is coming up. They ordered the reports, the financial reports and all this kind of stuff. So the NDAA is coming up. They're trying to figure out the budget for the NDAA. So we know that we need to keep an eye on that. Let's see how that comes about. I know that Tulsi did. She talked about it in one of her live streams. She talks about how that's something that they want to see if they can push some amendments in there. But
I don't know, until the people rise up and demand real change, nothing on the top is really going to change.
Yeah.
Oh boy.
I know. I'm sorry.
That, enjoy the rest of your weekend.
On a downer. I'm sorry.
Oh man.
No, I mean, I think change is positive. It's scary, but it's been a long time coming. It's about time. Let's get some change here.
Yeah, I have to focus on that. People aren't being fooled. The fact that Bowman got elected and things like that we can, and that, a lot of people are obviously, their eyes are awake because of George Floyd's murder, that there's positive things that can happen if people can grab power, which requires clean elections.
I mean, this shows this, well, I mean, but that's the other thing. But I mean, it shows this whole thing with Bowman and Booker shows that, gee, there's opportunities there for other people who want to run against incumbents, because no longer is money a guarantee of victory. Look at Amy McGrath in Kentucky. She had $41 million versus whatever Booker had. Mm-hmm. Nothing compared to that. And we also got Nancy Pelosi, Shahid Buttar coming up in November. No matter what you think of Shahid Buttar, I think
that would really shake it up. If he were to actually win, that would send tremors, I think.
I got an email from Nancy Pelosi today saying that I'm one of the grassroots Democrats, that she's concerned.
Did she call herself a progressive?
No, she didn't use that word, but she said we're committed not only to protecting, but expanding, ! Our majority. I know I can't do it alone. It will take each and every grassroots Democrat on my team to make it happen. So I can become part of her team by just sending her a few bucks.
Grassroots.
Yeah, it's grassroots.
Whoa,
it's grassroots and progressive, yeah.
Yep. And she's going to work. She's going to work.
Millionaire doing grassroots fundraising?
She's going to work on lowering healthcare costs. Oh, I'm so excited.
Oh,
man.
And she's going to work on
people on Cobra.
ending attacks in our environment. That's great.
I mean, this woman is 80 years old. Doesn't she have some great grandchildren she can hang around with or something?
Oh, wow.
What is she doing?
Well, she
Why
was
was
talking
she-
about. You heard her talking about George. What was his name? It wasn't Floyd.
Oh, she got the name wrong. Yeah, what did
and
she
Chuck
say?
Schumer did. Chuck Schumer did as well. She named some comedian who died in the mid '90s, which is probably where she's kind of stuck
man.
mentally. Yeah, I forgot.
Does she have a Biden moment? Is that what you're saying?
It was as painful as watching. Recently, was it recently, or just I see an old one? Jimmy Dore had a thing on when Amy Klobuchar was stuck trying to remember the name of the Mexican president.
Right.
And she's just like, you know.
Well, that was. I mean, yeah. Still, I mean, you'd expect. I would have expected. Nancy Pelosi to remember.
You think George Floyd would be more on the tip of the tongue,
right?
Given
right.
this, yeah.
Right. So, anyways,
All right,
everybody,
guys.
Watch it, everybody.
have a good week. Talk
Thanks
to
a
you
lot,
later.
guys.
Bye-bye.
Bye.